Okay, they can hear us. So hi, everyone. I'd like to thank everyone for attending our session and also for the invitation to come and present at the Pillars 2021 conference. So today, Heather and I are going to be speaking about making connections for student success. Technical difficulties. Hold on, there we go. Making connections for student success, common themes found in the ACRL Framework for Information Literacy, the American Association of School Librarian Standards, and the Common Core State Standards. So before we get started with our content, Heather and I would just like to take a moment to introduce ourselves. So I will begin. My name is Caroline Fuchs. I am an associate professor and the university librarian at St. John's University. My pronouns are she and her. I am a white woman with short gray hair and glasses. So I have an instructional design background, and in addition to being the university librarian, I am also the learning design librarian, which is pretty much an instructional design librarian. I have a background not only in higher ed and academic librarianship, but that is a second career for me. I had a first career as a teacher of 6th, 7th, and 8th grades. So that's relevant in that it kind of guides my thinking very often when it comes to academic librarianship. Okay, Heather.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending. My name is Heather Ball, as you've heard. My pronouns are she and her, and I am an assistant professor and the critical pedagogy librarian for student success at St. John's. I've been here for approximately 4 years. Wow, the time flies when you're having fun. And before that had been at a few libraries and museums doing part-time cataloging and metadata work, while also serving as the global network research manager for a leading advertising agency. These experiences gave me a heavy background working with and compiling data and applying statistical analyses to work across large data sets. That comes in handy here, as you will see, and I then applied that focus to my pedagogical practices at St. John's. I'm currently in the process of obtaining my doctorate from the University of Buffalo SUNY in information science, and my current work focuses on equitable and critical pedagogical practices within multi-session information literacy workshops to different student demographics on campus, namely students of color and student veterans.
So as we move into our content, I just want to take a few minutes to talk about what we set out to do in this study. So the first thing that so by the way, Heather and I are mentor-mentee, so we work together regularly, and we've done a couple of articles and presentations and publications together. So we do this together all the time, so just a heads up. Sometimes we speak in shortcuts and in our own language. So what we set out to do with this project was to analyze the key foundational information literacy documents that are used by educators and librarians. The impetus of this project, what sparked our work, or actually my work, because I started this before Heather was at St. John's, was when the ACRL framework was in development, and when the frames were being developed in 2014, 2015, there was a great deal of controversy over the frames. Many of you may remember the controversies. And as I was watching and listening to the debates, the pros and the cons of the new ACRL framework, it reminded me that there were similar debates and objections and dismay and enthusiasm running the gamut for the CCSS, which is the Common Core State Standards. And as I was wondering about this, I began to think in my head that both the Common Core state standards as well as the new, at that time, new ACRL frames were based on threshold competencies, were based on a switch to an approach to learning where students would be, it's kind of a constructionist version of learning where students would be building on knowledge that they already had. And I began to wonder, is there other similarities between the Common Core state standards and the ACRL frames, other than the controversy, other than these kind of the shift in mindset to include threshold concepts. And then later, as I began to think about this, and by then Heather was kind of involved, where did the AASL fit into this picture? So what we did initially was we identified the foundational documents, which are the Common Core state standards, the ACRL Framework for Information Literacy in Higher Education, and the AASL, which we will talk about in a little bit. Once we identified the 3 documents, we did a kind of peripheral analysis. We read through them and talked about them a little bit. And then from there, we created this crosswalk to determine if there were common themes and intersectionalities. So first we wanted to see what they had in common, if anything. We wanted to then see if there were differences and or gaps to do kind of a gap analysis. But once we determined the commonalities and the intersectionalities, we wanted to see what could be done across the spectrum of teaching. So K through 12, and then higher ed, college and beyond, where we would have opportunities to kind of work together as educators and librarians from the K through the higher ed experience. So where were the opportunities for collaboration is what we were hoping to find.
And just an aside, I forgot to say this before, I see that the chat is popping and people are chatting in the box. I am not savvy enough to monitor that and share my screen, so we are not ignoring anything. I promise once we stop sharing, we will run through all of the chat questions, comments, so please don't feel like you're being ignored. I can't do that right now. So the big why. Once Caroline brought me on board and I got caught up to speed, we had many brainstorming sessions to figure out just exactly what we wanted to investigate within these areas and documents, how we were going to do it, and what we were ultimately looking to achieve, as Caroline said, the crosswalks. So after several sessions, we distilled our thoughts down to a 3-pronged scaffolded research question, which works out perfectly because there are 3 documents. First, we wanted to know how the CCSS, and this is going to be a very acronym heavy presentation. I will try and intermingle it with what they actually are so that we don't get confused. So how the Common Core might inform the work of academic librarians. Then we wanted to see if there was a continuity in aims when juxtaposing the CCSS and the ACRL framework. And finally, was there a consistent approach to teaching information literacy across the Common Core, the school librarian standards, and the ACRL framework? So we've referenced the 3 guiding information literacy documents we investigated, but we wanted to give you quick recaps here of each of them, as we know this audience is comprised of librarians and specialists within both secondary and higher education environments, and some may be unfamiliar with one or more, and we didn't want to leave anybody behind. So we will take you through the Common Core standards, the American Association of School Librarian Standards for the 21st Century Learner, and the Association of College and Research Libraries, or ACRL's, Framework for Information Literacy in Higher Education. One of the other monitors will be dropping links into the chat for each of these in case anybody would like visuals to go along with our slides. It was just a little too cumbersome to try and include them in the limited space here. So those should be coming in the chat any second, and here we go.
Okay, so before I spend a few minutes talking about the Common Core State Standards or the CCSS, I just want to point out that the 3 foundational documents were all created in the early part of the 21st century. So they are all fairly new foundational documents. So CCSS was created and adopted in 2009. The AASL was updated in 2017, and the ACRL Framework in 2016. So they all kind of bubbled up and emerged around the same time. So just to get folks up to speed on the Common Core State Standards, because many of us are librarians and not K through 12 teachers. Let me just give you some background. So again, they were adopted in 2009, not without controversy. They're still pretty controversial. They are national standards that were established, but then led by the state and the local governments. And they are geared toward the K through 12 environment. They were initially designed to align with college expectations and workforce readiness. In other words, the plan originally was to make sure that students, when they left the 12th grade, were either ready to go into the workforce because they had the right skills to be productive, or go into entry-level college work and be academically prepared. The standards, the CCSS, are evidence-based standards, which means there's less testing and more portfolio work, summative assessments, and that kind of thing. There are 2 main categories in the CCSS, ELA, which is English Language Arts, and Math. We are focusing on English Language Arts for the sake of our study. And lots of times people question why it's only English Language Arts and Math. And theoretically, the skill sets that are learned in English Language Arts, or ELA, should be able to bubble over into other subject areas like social studies, like science, and so on. Theoretically, students, theoretically, the CCSS established what students should learn, but the standards did not establish how they should learn, which is very similar to the ACRL frames, where it's kind of a framework, but it's not prescriptive in nature. So information literacy as a process of creation rather than just a set of standards. Okay. Yep.
So that is applied broadly throughout K through 12. Then it distills a little further down into the American Association of School Librarian Standards for the 21st Century Learner. So ideally, we would hope that every learner encounters these as well, because every learner would be using the library. And this was established in, as Caroline said, it's decades old, but it was revisited in 2015 through a remodeling process of their earlier standards. Using the identified common beliefs that were central to AASL, namely that the school library is a unique and essential part of the learning community. Qualified school librarians lead effective school libraries. Learners should be prepared for college, career, and life. Reading is the core of academic and personal competency. Intellectual freedom is every learner's right, and the information technologies must be appropriately integrated and equitably available. That was a mouthful, sorry. So using those common beliefs as a base, the organization embarked on a multi-layered data collection and research process to update the decades-old previous standards to fit the 21st century learner. The result was the integrated standards framework that incorporates the 6 shared foundations that you can see on the screen of inquire, include, collaborate, curate, explore, and engage, to form a matrix when crossed with the 4 domains and competencies of think, create, share, and grow. The cross-categorization was meant to reflect the comprehensive and interconnected approach to teaching and learning that comes from the relationship between the learner, the librarian, and the library standards. The infographic generated, which again is on the slide, helps to illustrate the mutually reinforcing nature of each process, each part of the process.
So for those of you unfamiliar with the ACRL Framework for Information Literacy, the framework was adopted in 2016. It was a shift from this, the ACRL standards, competency standards in information literacy, which was kind of a checklist of things that people could do, to a more conceptual model with introducing information literacy as a fluid, ongoing process that is underscored through and creates authentic learning. ACRL framework, there are 6 frames. Authority is constructed and contextual. Information creation as a process. Information has value. Research as inquiry. Scholarship as conversation. Searching as strategic exploration. These are interconnected threshold concepts. They are not things that can be taught as a skill set. Students have a greater role in creating new knowledge. That's part of the foundational concepts of the ACRL frames. And they need an understanding of the changing ecosystem of information creation and use. And students should be able to use information and data in an ethical manner. These are all the underpinnings of the ACRL frames. The frames also include 2 things. One is called knowledge practices, which is, and I'm going to quote, demonstrations of ways in which learners can increase these information literacy concepts, and dispositions, which describe ways in which to address the effective, attitudinal, or valuing dominion of learning. Like the CSS and the AASL, these are not prescriptive documents. They are designed so that librarians or educators at their own institution can use these documents as a framework, as a foundation to create instructional programs, instruction, and student learning outcomes that are more in keeping with their institution, with their school, with their college, with their campus. Another key component of the frames is that students are both consumers and producers of information, and that requires critical reflection. Okay, so get ready for the data speak side of things. I promise not to get too geeky. Actually, I make no promises on that. So first, we use these 3 foundational documents that we summarized as a base for our analysis, which we termed information literacy practices, or ILP. Next, we populated Excel worksheets with all of the mindsets, knowledge practices, dispositions, learning outcomes, etc., from each of the ILPs, which we then termed key performance indicators, or KPIs. This oversimplification was done for sheer expediency, and in no way is meant to say that the definitions of each term, like dispositions or mindset, are the same. After all of the KPIs were recorded, we found there to be 184 measurable KPIs across the ILPs, 33 within Common Core, 68 within the AASL, and 83 for ACRL. Then it was time to dive in. So each of us read through the worksheets several times to get a sense of the recurring themes across these KPIs. And we had several discussions to narrow down the themes to the most prevalent amongst them. We also realized that we needed to parse themes out for the learners who are both using information and creating it, like Caroline said, producers and consumers, as each has important distinctions to address and couldn't just be bucketed together.
So once we agreed upon those two categories, consumers of information and creators of information, and the underlying 20 themes across both categories, which we will go into in the next few slides, we established the coding manual and definitions of each theme. This helped tremendously when we were working separately to code the KPIs, and as a refresher, when we were writing up our article a few months later. After the manual was created, we independently went through each KPI to see which theme best fit, coded as such in the worksheet, and then came together to discuss our thoughts and any discrepancies. For some of the KPIs, we had wildly different ideas, which made us realize that the KPIs were complex enough, which they had been created to do so, so that makes sense, that one theme could not adequately describe them and was insufficient to capture the intended nuances and complexities. A new worksheet was created, as you can tell I love tables, to offer 4 columns per coder, a primary and a secondary code relating to consumers of information, and a primary and secondary code relating to creators of information. We then went back to the drawing board and recoded each KPI with primary and secondary themes. And in the case of 3 KPIs within AASL, a tertiary theme, came together to discuss and finalize the coding with 85% intercoder agreement. In total, the 20 themes occurred 473 times across the KPIs, with the categories of consumer having 233 and the category of creator having 240, which interestingly shows the near even split of representation for learners as both consumers and creators of information. But I digress in the data. Let's jump into defining the categories and themes, and then we'll talk about that later.
Okay, so as Heather mentioned, we had 2 categories, consumers of information, and we define that to mean students search for, discover, locate, interpret, and use information resources to address a research need. It's kind of vague. We did that on purpose. There were a total of, I want to say 10 themes within that category: exploration, discovery, diversification, inclusivity, authority and context, interpretation, critical analysis, ethical considerations, global and cultural awareness, and collaborative and interconnected community. If you were paying attention, and I'm sure in your brain you have captured every single one of our previous slides, you will realize that some of these themes are actually, so authority and context is part of a frame, an ACRL frame. Collaborative and interconnected community is really part of AASL. So these kind of merged with one another. I'm just going to spend a minute defining these. Do we have time? Yeah. Yes. Okay. So when we say exploration, and the reason why Heather and I actually had to write down these definitions, we had to make sure that we both, when we're looking at exploration as a theme, that we were both defining it in the same way, because when we first approached this, we weren't. So we did this on purpose, and we actually, when I went and recoded, and I know Heather did the same, I had the definitions in front of me. So when I was stuck, because when you code all of these documents again and again, your brain becomes very mushy. So we define exploration as students set on a path to identify a research question or possible avenues of inquiry, including the seeking of foundational information from research resources and/or people. And when we say research resources, that's not a judgment on authority, right? A research resource can be an authoritative text in the traditional sense, or it could be a tweet. Discovery, defined as students find and locate the appropriate information resources, and in doing so determine that they need to ask new questions or explore other avenues of inquiry. 3 is diversification, where students seek, consider, evaluate, and aim to include a mixture of diverse information resources, including but not limited to format type, source of information, and variant points of view and/or perspectives, each adding value in a unique way. Inclusivity here means that students seek, consider, evaluate, and aim to include information resources that include a variety of voices, especially those that were created by those who might often be excluded or marginalized. Authority and context for us meant that students understand that authority may have different meanings or value dependent upon the research context in which it is sought. By interpretation, we meant that students understand the meaning and usefulness of information resources and are able to articulate useful, informed connections. Critical analysis, means that students apply critical thinking skills to determine the usefulness and appropriateness of information resources in relations to their research inquiry. Ethical considerations means that students understand and acknowledge the idea of intellectual property, demonstrated by the use and citing of information created by others. Global and cultural awareness meant that students demonstrated an awareness of social, political, economic, cultural, or other factors that may vary from society to society and may have an impact on the creation and sharing of information and information resources. And finally, collaborative and interconnected community means that students understand that as researchers, they become part of a scholarly community, whether they work as individuals or in direct partnership with others. I know that's a lot.
And spoiler alert, 2 of those are the same for our second category, so you only have to listen to a few more definitions. So as I previously stated, the consumers category had 233 theme occurrences across the 184 KPIs. As you can see, the consumer themes spiked differently across the 3 ILPs, with, for example, critical analysis and interpretation having the highest percentages for CCSS, collaborative and interconnected community for AASL, and exploration for the framework. Despite these spikes, there are commonalities between them. So for example, you can see that even if the percentages weren't the highest, there was a link across the 3 for discovery, diversification, inclusivity, and global and cultural awareness. And for those who are interested, we used a 7.5 variance to measure the commonalities. This is important because while each document may have been created in different contexts with varying objectives in mind, it shows that even across these different environments, there are core themes that are crucial for consumers of information to learn.
So, which brings us back to more definitions. I apologize. So we talked about consumers of information, and now we're shifting gears to creators of information, which we defined as students create and produce scholarship in a variety of formats and levels that are appropriate to their own research needs in a specific environment. There were also 10 themes within the category 2 of creators of information. I will read 8 of them because you've already heard 9 and 10, which is global and cultural awareness and collaborative and interconnected community. So synthesis of information as defined by us meant that students identify, combine, organize, and/or synthesize relevant information from a variety of information resources. Integration of information meant that students include relevant information and information resources in a coherent, cohesive, and logical manner into their own creative product, whatever that product is. Informed participation means that students create a new information and scholarship based upon their own research and discovery. Knowledge creation means that students are active participants in the creation of new knowledge. Iterative practices meant that students apply the understanding that research and information creation practices are not binary, but rather cyclical in nature. Reflective practices defined as students think about and critically assess their own research and writing practices, questioning their assumptions and potential biases in order to be better researchers and information creators. And finally, clear articulation of ideas. Students clearly articulate a research question and their own emerging scholarship.
So within the 473 KPIs, 240 aligned with creators of information category. Once again, the themes spike differently across the documents, but they're interesting when taken in succession, as I think it shows the progression from introductory level skills to higher order research skills across a learning continuum. For example, the two largest represented themes in the Common Core are clear articulation of ideas and global and cultural awareness, with integration of information and informed participation close seconds. Then for AASL, it progresses to balanced and ethical judgment and collaborative and interconnected community, to finish within the ACRL framework with informed participation and reflective practices. This progression across a learner's pathway is coupled with the commonalities seen across the document, namely knowledge creation, reflective practices, and global and cultural awareness. Taken together, the predominant commonalities seen across both of the categories reveal a global importance of collaboration, community engagement, ethical practices, and the articulation and representation of sound arguments and ideas. This shows the changing rhetoric within both secondary and higher education. No longer is information literacy simply about finding, locating, collating research and skills-oriented. It's more nuanced and complex to inclusively reflect the cultural landscape and its importance in lifelong learning practices.
So what did we learn? So we learned this took a lot of time. That's number one, but we didn't put that on the slide. We learned that there are indeed some common themes in the foundational documents. We also learned that the documents underscore, all of them underscore this changing approach to information literacy, which is moving along a continuum rather than, as we've said before, kind of this check-off skill set. That students are being taught from K through college that information is nuanced, that it's complex, and that they need to apply critical thinking to their evaluation, their finding, and their creation of new information. We also found that there's information literacy is more nuanced to more inclusivity. There's more of an emphasis on collaborative learning, collaborative research, the role of an individual scholar, but also the role of an individual scholar in the larger group of scholarship. This has brought us to think about the opportunities for us to have more cross collaboration. It also has brought to the forefront some of the challenges that we face as academics, as librarians, as educators, in trying to teach students a basic concept of information literacy using 3 different documents that really don't talk to one another and never were designed to talk to one another, which causes us to think that maybe we need to start really concentrating on breaking down some of these silos, and maybe creating a new document that kind of goes through, I hate to say it, but something that everyone can use and be reflective on.
So why do these numbers matter? Like Caroline was saying, they matter because they help to quantitatively show that there are commonalities and intersecting points between the 3 ILPs and room for us to cross over and collaborate, which can take learners across their entire academic career cohesively. These crosswalks help to show that there is in fact a path for a continuum across secondary and higher education, which when applied collaboratively can not only prepare the learner's information literacy skills for the next educational phase through this scaffolded application, but can ensure the progressive learning of higher order information literacy skills that each document addresses. By creating a common vernacular and dialogue between educators at all levels, true collaboration and conversation can be fostered across institutional practices and various standards, all of which will ultimately benefit the learner, which is why we're all here to begin with.
So where do we go from here? We've been asking that question since we stopped coding. We still don't have quite the answer. We definitely know that we need further analysis of the crosswalks and the ILPs. I think we need to, as a community, work together to help school and academic librarians make connections, so that we're not saying, you know, at the K through 12, okay, you're done doing this stuff, and now in higher ed, now you're going to do this stuff, because that's really not what's happening. They really are interconnected. So we need to break down those barriers and create some new pathways to collaboration. Heather and I are still grappling again what we're going to do moving forward. One of the things that we are working on is more research. So we are actually using those 3 foundational documents to, we're recoding and we're revisiting them through an equity and inclusion lens, to see if there are opportunities for students at a very early age to be introduced to a more equitable and inclusive educational environment. So we're in the process of revisiting our crosswalks
And recoding.
Because we love to code. And at some point, once we finish this work, we will hopefully publish the results. We thank you now for listening. If you'd like to learn more about our study, there is a link that's on the slide. The DOI is on the slide. We can probably put it in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
We have published this in college and university libraries.
Undergraduate libraries.
College and undergraduate libraries, sorry.
We're going for the other one next.
Yes. So we're happy to answer any questions at this point. So maybe, Heather, we should stop
Yes,
sharing.
I'm going to stop sharing the screen so that I can see the chat. Okay.
Okay, that was terrific. Thank you. So I think you were pressing, you already answered our first question, which was where you've published. So if you want to pop a link in the chat, that might be helpful as well for people to see your scholarship. And while you're doing that, I had another question that was in the chat. Andrew asked if you could explain again KPI.
Absolutely. And I apologize because that is hold on, let me get back to Zoom. I can't do many things at once. The DOI I just popped into our chat. KPIs are a holdover from corporate and business marketing. So key performance indicators. It basically overarches the dispositions and mindsets, and it's just a phrase that's used and another acronym that we could use, which I apparently love. So yes, does that answer your question? It's just another term for our other terms.
We do love those acronyms, right?
We can't help ourselves.
So we have another question. Could you propose a K-16 document to the New York State Board? I've been tracking their documents on media literacy as well.
Could we propose it? Oh, I would love to.
Why
But
not?
here's the thing, we have to, you know, it can't just be Heather and I, so we'd have to have a community of geeks that are willing to work on this and propose it. I think that would be a fabulous idea. I know other folks who are probably in this room, although I didn't see who else is here. I know there are other folks who are working on this. I know there's another presentation coming up, I believe on Friday, about collaborating with community colleges, collaborating with high schools. And I think moving forward, this is absolutely the way to go. If anybody's interested in collaborating on petitioning to the New York State or any other state, I'm happy to do it.
Why not?
Just reach
yeah.
out, let's blow it up.
So we have a few more minutes if anybody else would like to pop a few more questions into the chat, into the Q&A. And if there are any in the chat, we're going to scroll through that for a bit. What's the next steps in your research? I'd like to know. Next.
For that, Sarah, thank you very much for pointing out that there is a updated version of AASL. We will look into that for our next thing. So thank you for pointing that out. Like Caroline said, we're recoding for inclusivity and equitable practices. So what we did was we took now I'm like all of the acronyms that they're not in front of me. We're taking the KPIs that we originally coded for global and cultural awareness and interconnected community. And we're looking at those and inclusivity. And we're zooming into that. And then we've come up with new definitions. I think 6 is our last count of inclusive practices or inclusive things that we're looking at within those KPIs and seeing where, like we did with this, the commonalities between the 3 ILPs for cross collaboration and conversation. We're now zooming into how we can do that relating to equitable practices also across the learning continuum.
Right. So the original study was kind of a macro look, and now we're zooming in on kind of these micro analyses of the 3 documents and where we see some opportunities.
Have you heard from any other scholars working similarly? You've read the published work?
Well, we just published it as of last month, I think. So not yet, but there was a question from an anonymous attendee. Yeah, the more people who want to help us code or like talk about this, the better. Like Caroline said, any geeks, nerds, welcome. We like doing this, and the whole point is collaboration. So yes, you have our emails, and please get in contact if you would like to jump in.
Yeah, if anybody has any more ideas about, so, we're academics, we tend to be very theory heavy. I'd love some ideas on how to make this move forward in a more practical way.
And like Caroline has said before, and someone else said, while we would love to do this and make it actionable, the point is for it to be inclusive and collaborative. So we didn't want to just add another document or something out there with no conversation. So we're very mindful of opening this up as a starter. We don't know where we ultimately will go. And I don't think it's our part to dictate that. I think it's supposed to be a communal effort.
Okay, so we have a question in the chat. I'm not sure if you already did this because I thought you did. Would you mind putting in the DOI for the paper?
Yes. Do I need the
you sent it to the
DOI.org?
panelists only.
Oh, my bad.
Yeah,
I
that's a
before,
defect in
that was me.
that's a defect in Zoom.
There we
go.
Framework. Okay. Thank you for putting that in. Very helpful. Okay, let's see if we have any other open questions. I am not seeing any other open questions, and give people a minute to type quickly. Otherwise, we will wrap up.
More time for lunch.
Right? I want to thank you very much for joining our Pillars community today for our inaugural Pillars conference. Okay, I'm not seeing any open questions. We're getting a lot of thank yous in the chat. So thank you, everyone. We will have an hour break for lunch. The next presentation will be Developing College-Ready Students. And you can access the meeting from the Pillars program to join us there at 1 p.m. Eastern time. However, in the event that program page is down due to your great enthusiasm for Pillars, you can also access the sessions via the PDF version of the program. And I'm going to put that into the chat if Caitlin hasn't already done it, so that everybody has a moment to copy that. Thank you very much for presenting today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. And thank you for everyone who's watching. Thanks for coming.
Enjoy the symposium.
And lunch.
Bye.
And lunch. Thank you.